The Unseen Tenant. The old apartment complex on the edge of town was always a place of quiet unease. Built in the 1920s, it had seen countless residents come and go, but over the years, more and more units remained vacant. Those who moved in rarely stayed for long, leaving in the dead of night with little explanation. The building had a reputation, a dark, unsettling one. But like most rumours, it was easy to dismiss, and that's exactly what Marie did when she found the listing. Marie was new to the city, desperate for a place to call her own after a messy breakup. The rent was cheap, the unit spacious, and the building's faded grandeur appealed to her sense of nostalgia. The landlord was an elderly man, quiet and polite, who handed her the keys with a look that was almost apologetic. The first night in her new apartment, Marie noticed something strange. As she unpacked, she heard faint footsteps above her. She knew the apartment above was vacant. The landlord had mentioned it himself. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate, as if someone was pacing back and forth. She brushed it off as the old building settling and continued unpacking. But the noises persisted. Every night, without fail, the footsteps would start at exactly 11 p.m. They would continue for hours, sometimes stopping abruptly, only to resume minutes later. Marie tried to ignore them, but the more she listened, the more unnerving they became. It wasn't just footsteps. Occasionally she would hear the sound of furniture scraping against the floor, and once she could have sworn she heard a door creak open and slam shut. One night, she decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, she climbed the narrow staircase leading to the vacant apartment above. The hallway was dark, the air thick with the scent of mildew. The door to the apartment was slightly ajar, the lock broken as if it had been forced open. Marie hesitated but pushed the door open wider. The apartment was empty, just as the landlord had said. Dust covered every surface and the air was stale, as if no one had entered for years. Yet, the moment she stepped inside, the footsteps started again this time, directly behind her. She spun around, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there. The room was silent, the only sound her own ragged breathing. She backed out of the apartment, closing the door behind her, and hurried back to her unit, her heart pounding in her chest. That night, she barely slept, the sounds from above more relentless than ever. When morning came, she confronted the landlord, demanding to know if he had rented the apartment out without telling her. The old man shook his head, his expression grave. "No one has lived there for years," he said quietly. "But you're not the first to hear things. Many have left because of it." Marie's blood ran cold. "What happened there?" she asked. The landlord hesitated, as if debating whether to tell her. "Finally," he sighed. "The last tenant. He wasn't well. He became obsessed with the idea that something was living in the walls, something only he could hear. He would spend hours at night pacing, trying to track the noises. One day he just vanished. The police searched the apartment, but they never found a trace of him. It's like he just walked out and disappeared." Marie left the office in a daze, her mind racing. That night, the footsteps started again, but this time they were different. They were different. They were faster, more frantic, as if whoever or whatever was up there was in a hurry. The next morning, Marie noticed something that made her stomach drop. The ceiling in her living room had a small crack in it, one that hadn't been there before. As the days passed, the crack grew larger, spreading across the ceiling like a spiderweb. The footsteps grew louder, more insistent, now accompanied by a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across wood. Marie became convinced that something was trying to break through the ceiling, something that shouldn't be there. One night, as she lay in bed, the crack in the ceiling finally gave way. Plaster rained down, and with it, something else, something dark and cold. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. Marie stared up at the gaping hole in her ceiling, her heart pounding, unable to move. Then she saw it. A pair of eyes, hollow and lifeless, stared down at her from the darkness above. A cold, bony hand reached through the hole, grasping at the edges, as if trying to pull itself through. Marie screamed and ran for the door, but as she reached for the handle, she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. She turned around slowly, and there it was standing in the middle of her living room, its twisted form illuminated by the dim light filtering through the curtains. It was the last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her whole. The next day, the landlord found her apartment empty. Her belongings were still there, but Marie was gone, just like the tenant before her. The only sign that she had ever been there was a new crack in the ceiling, now sealed with a thick layer of dust. And every night, at exactly 11 p.m., the footsteps would start again, waiting for the next tenant.